folks, what are some things that rural folks wouldn't understand? Story 1. The way that people are considerate to each other is very different in urban versus rural. In rural areas, you show respect and consideration by acknowledging each other, saying hi on the street, chatting with the cashier, etc. In urban areas, you show the same by allowing everyone to go about their business. You move to the side if you're walking more slowly than everyone else. You don't catch anyone's eye in case they think you're about to ask for something, and you quietly and efficiently help someone who needs it, like bringing a stroller up the subway stairs, so that those people can move effectively through the space as well. Each area finds the other area's way of doing things annoying or rude. Story 2. The joy of anonymity. I've never lived in a small town, but one thing I've always heard is that everyone knows everyone. To a lot of people, that probably seems like a good thing. It's friendlier and people say hi on the street and all that. To me, that sounds like a nightmare. ID feel exposed all the time. Like ID always have to be ready for a conversation, and everyone would know what I'm doing all the time. Anonymity is freeing. You could just go where you want and do what you want. And as long as you're not actively bothering someone, they don't give a what you're up to. You can choose when and where to socialize, and unexpected run-ins with people you know are relatively uncommon. So if you're not feeling social, you don't have to be. Story 3. We treat busy sidewalks like highways. You wouldn't stop in the middle of the highway to figure out where you're going. You wouldn't stop in the middle of the highway to take pictures. You wouldn't weave back and forth across the lanes just for kicks. You wouldn't drive 4 abreast with your friends and take up the entire road. If you need to stop somewhere, pull over to the side and get out of the way. Story 4. My wife grew up in a rural community. I grew up bouncing between Detroit and New York. The first time I took my wife to a large city to see my family was the first time she had ever been to a large city. I had to very quickly explain that if random strangers on the street try to stop her and talk, it is likely they are asking for money. She was almost scammed into buying day-old newspapers a couple times, and some guy in a character costume almost convinced her to take a selfie with them. Please never do this. Never take a selfie with a random person in a mascot character costume in the city. Inversely, the 100-ish residents of her small farm town knew me as a gigantic for years because I would never engage with strangers who spoke to me at the gas station or the dollar store, the only 2 locations out here. I am not joking. But the reason I would blow people off or give them the cold shoulder is because it was genuinely wild to me that strangers would just talk to each other in public, and they didn't want anything from me. Story 5. The freedom of choice of products and services available in the city. Rural people don't have 7 grocery stores or restaurants to choose from without having to drive an hour. Story 6. There is generally an inherent set of manners in which most people go by in the city to make things easier and faster for people to deal with large crowds. A lot of people try to fit the manners of living in rural areas to cities rather than try to learn the manners of city living, and get very frustrated when people in the city collectively treat them as rude. Story 7. That a lot of people don't drive. Even many people who can afford cars decide not to get one because it often isn't worth the hassle. I live walking distance from a subway station where trains come every 6 minutes during rush hour and 10 minutes off peak, as well as a bus line where buses come as often as every 3 minutes. Why would I ever drive when I have all my essentials within walking distance and can get anywhere else in the city that easily? And if I want to leave the city, we have apps you can rent a car with. You can even walk up to a rental car not in use and open it with your phone. Story 8. I worked on a TV show with some incredibly rural people, and they would say things like if I lived in a city, I would immediately get shot, get into fights. And it struck me as so weird because only in the country are people quick to get into your business and start. I live in a city, and everyone just minds their own business unless you go out of your way to start something yourself. You could be weird in the city, and no one will give a single about it. But in the country, everyone knows who you are and has an opinion about you. You'd think because you hear about cities being super violent that random violence just happens, but no one has ever been so openly hostile to me as when I was working in the country as an outsider. Story 9. Walkability, for sure. I was once bragging to a rural family member about my new job that was just a 20 minutes 1 mile walking commute, and she legit thought it was insane to have to walk that far. Story 10. I lived in a town of less than 3,000 in Iowa for a while after college. I grew up in the suburbs of a major city and spent a lot of time in the city both before and after Iowa. It was 98x white. I don't think most understand how exposure to people not like you is so important, and it can make you a much better person. That you don't have to fear those that are different than you. They could never understand the pleasure of being able to walk anywhere to fulfill all your needs. And that public transportation can be so amazing. The absolute pleasure of having real choice because there isn't just one of any type of store, or worse, one store doing everything. Story 11. Most big cities are very safe for the average person. The people who approach you on the street aren't dangerous, just annoying. Rural freedom is often attached to suffocating social oppression. There are only a few acceptable ways of being. The larger the city, the more you can be whoever you want to be and look however you want to look. You have anonymity. There's a reason that the weird, quiet kid you went to high school with moved away and then popped up a few years later on social media looking amazing, happy, and successful. Story 12. Multiculturalism and diversity. Having lived in NYC growing up, I was able to interact with many different cultures, religions, and gender orientations. Living in the suburbs, now the diversity of population is not nearly as vast, but still offers a bit of a mix. Seems to me, when I visit rural areas, it's a very homogeneous population, which I can imagine makes it really difficult for people to understand and tolerate other cultures and worldviews. I think every rural American should be required to spend 2 weeks in a major American city and city folks to spend 2 weeks in rural America. This would go a long way to healing our culture divide. Story 13. Generally speaking, there's been a recent historical push to paint cities as incredibly dangerous, crime-laden places full of pimps and drug users are stolen car parts for sale on every corner. This is political propaganda that really took full swing as backlash to the civil rights movement. It is, in a word, racist nonsense. Okay, 2 words. Story 14. Because we're forced to live in such close proximity to so many others, we're much more tolerant in general, it seems. Can't tell you how many homeless people doing the fentanyl shuffle or dudes shooting up into their hand on top of my corner mailbox I've seen, but it doesn't faze me. They're not out to hurt you. They're out to hurt themselves and are not supported by society in a healthy way so they can receive treatment. The importance of social programs is paramount. So, is cultural diversity. It's nice to have a Chinatown and a little Puerto Rico or French Quarter in your city. It's relevant to pass embassies on your way to work or school. Or the woman on the floor above you and her kids are Ukrainian refugees who don't speak English. You're much more aware that there's other people in the world and that you are connected to them and that they matter in general. Some city people get tuned out to this completely and stop caring, but country people seem only out to protect themselves and not interested in participating with the rest of the world. I have lived in large cities like Seattle and Berlin, and also rural areas like Ferndale and Grobettlingen. Story 15. We actually don't want a single-family house with a yard. We prefer living in townhouses and condos and multi-unit buildings. We may have a small garden, but we don't want to maintain a yard. We will gladly trade off having a smaller home for the ability to walk places and not have to own a car, or at least not have to use a car every day. It's also a whole lot less to maintain and pay for. Story 16. Grew up in rural area. Have lived in the city for 15 years. City people are much more forward erect in their communication. If there's an issue, they're much more apt to confront it. In my rural experience, people were much more passive-aggressive and had worse communication skills. Story 17. I've lived in both, and I can say for certain that rural folks don't give half the about city living as we think they do. It's not that they don't understand the city way of life. It's that it doesn't occur to them because it isn't a lifestyle they would ever consider. But the biggest difference I think surprises most is how long it takes to travel places. Walking, public trans, traffic, it all takes so long to cover a relatively short distance. It would take me longer to walk 7 blocks to my nearest supermarket in Chicago, do my shopping, and carry my groceries home than it took me to drive 10 miles to the store and back in my rural town. Story 18. When my relatives who are from the rural side of the country visit me in the big city, Gothenburg, it strikes me that I take for granted that there is almost always something open or available, which they can't really apprehend as the slightest thing for they need to be planned. Then I've noticed that they move rather unusually among larger crowds. Don't know how many times I lost them just because they got behind a group of people as they didn't really know how to move around them. Story 19. I just wish rural people would stop giving me their unsolicited opinions on why city life is bad and rural life is superior. If I agreed, I'd live somewhere rural. Please stop insulting my home. It's extra funny when you pick that conversation up and discuss why you don't want to live in rural areas, and they take it personally. Story 20. The sheer volume and variety of experiences you can have in a good city. One of my favorite examples is Dash Puzzle Hunt, which is something you would never know existed if you don't live somewhere that hosts one, and there are thousands of events like that. Street art festivals, and amazing experimental theater experiences, and random weird underground events. There's just so much more richness and variety to life in a city. Story 21. Based on my experience with people in my rural hometown, they can't comprehend that I'm not constantly being victimized by violent crime and forcibly converted into a transgender person. Story 22. I'm a small town person, 20K-ish people, but my brother lives in Chicago, and every time I visit, I can't get over how long it takes to get places. For me, 20 miles, 20 minutes, to him, 2 miles, 20 minutes. They'll never get used to it. Story 23. They will never understand the soul-crushing defeat of how it feels walking out the door onto the street, only to realize you forgot your wallet on the coffee table of your 6th floor walk-up. Story 24. When you're home feeling lazy and pick up your phone. I live close to central London, so I can order food from the top restaurants in town and have it delivered within 30 minutes. Love the variety and quality, and I never take it for granted. Story 25. That cities can be neighborly. They're not wastelands of alienation. Sometimes rural people talk like they have a monopoly on neighborliness around here. We watch out for each other, and we care about our community, not like those big bad cities. In fact, when I live in a row house in D.C., I saw a lot more of my neighbors and knew them a lot better than I did living in a small town or in the suburbs. There's something about being right next door to someone where you can encounter them on the stoop, as opposed to being separated by big yards and long driveways. And just the fact of walking everywhere rather than driving means more encounters with neighbors. Not to mention, we had great block parties and neighborhood BBQs in our tiny backyard. Story 26. In the city, you lock the doors. Always the home before bed, the car every time you leave it, even if only going into a convenience store for just a minute. Story 27. We don't have to guzzle has to get a carton of milk. We don't live in constant fear of getting shot. We're not all snobs. We're more comfortable with strangers' beckus. We simply lack space to be picky about that. Being able to walk anywhere is so nice. Story 28. Diversity of people. You get to hear all kinds of fun stories that aren't just gossip like a rural area. And yes, I've lived in both. I live in a city with a very diverse immigrant population. You get a whole lot of restaurant choices: Cuban, Italian, Ethiopian, French, Mexican, etc., all authentic. Pretty much, you can pick something and we've got it. You want to try kangaroo? We've got that. It's great. Story 29. You're not more important than people in the cities. Seriously? In America, there seems to be this underlying sentiment that the only true Americans are from small towns, and that people in big cities couldn't possibly love America as much as people in small towns. They, and the media in general as well, tend to put themselves on a pedestal. The irony is that people in small towns like to say city folk are all, but the way they look down on everyone and act like they're special, because they're from a small town, sort of makes you wonder who the real is. Like, most people from city couldn't give a squirt of about where you're from, but in a small town they treat you differently if you're from a city. Story 30. Urban crime. For sure, gun violence is a real problem here in D.C., but it's not likely to affect random people like me who aren't involved in drugs or gangs. People from rural areas don't understand that it's possible for a neighborhood like mine to have high crime, and at the same time, anywhere I'm going to go is a totally safe place. Most of the time when I'm walking around, I see people walking designer dogs, babies in strollers, little old church ladies, etc. Story 31. I currently live in one of the biggest cities in the world. I grew up in Appalachia, in one of the smallest. Something people back home don't understand is the how many people live here and how that affects statistics. You see it all the time during elections when people share maps where the state is mostly red except for a few urban counties. They aren't dumb. They understand cities are more densely populated, obviously, but it's on such a scale it is hard to conceptualize. There are apartment buildings that hold more people than my hometown. Some hold more than the entire population of my home county easily. My hometown could be 100 red, it isn't, but just to simplify things, and it would be outvoted by a single apartment building in Philadelphia, as it should be. The scale does weird things with the perception of safety. We've had 2 murders in the last 10 years. While my current city has obviously a ton more, people and businesses get robbed all the time. But back home we know the robber, so it feels less scary. Back home people see news about awful things in the city and assume it is much, much less safe, but the per capita violent crime rate is actually less in the city. There's just more people, thus more crimes are able to be reported. Domestic violence is an epidemic in my hometown. Not saying it isn't a problem in cities, but I know people who live through horrors in their own homes in my hometown be terrified to visit my city. Crimes in my hometown aren't politicized into making the national news like crimes in Los Angeles are. For example, a bunch of teenagers decided to meet up and steal from the mall. In LA, that made national news. In my hometown, when that happens, the teenagers get some community service and get grounded by their parents or beat. It never in a million years would be on the news. Story 32. I want to know what the appeal of urban living is. I don't get why anyone would want to spend a fortune to live in a tiny space and be shoulder to shoulder with millions of people all the time. Story 33, when you grow up in a multicultural, multi-ethnic community in a big city like New York or San Francisco, it feels really creepy to be in a rural area that is all white people. Also, there are more kinds of Asian food than just Chinese. Story 34, my rural neighbors call us citified because we aren't cool with their herd of cows grazing daily in our yard. We texted when one cow crushed the side of the above-ground pool and caused a backyard waterfall. Citified means rude. Story 35, those tiny apartments you're paying an arm and leg for are thanks to the insane amount of amenities around you that someone living in a rural area wouldn't have. You aren't paying thousands of dollars to live in a tiny apartment. You're paying thousands of dollars to live within walking distance of everything you could ever want or need. Story 36, the joy of anonymity. I spent a good part of my life in small towns. I operated businesses, so knew a lot of people. We couldn't walk down the street or go to a store without running into dozens of people we knew. Sure, I guess that might be comforting to some, but it's also suffocating. Everyone knows you. Most of them know your business. It could be exhausting. Once the kids were grown, we moved back to the city. Now I can walk to my grocery and to maybe 20 restaurants. And the best part of all is that it's highly unlikely you'll bump into anyone who knows me. There's a certain non-judgmental live and let live dynamic that is necessary to communal living that I completely cherish. Story 37, if you're willing to put in the work to look for them, you'll find a tribe of people that you vibe with and or enjoy whatever activity you enjoy. I'm in a black cyclist group that will often meet at breweries or coffee shops, two things I very much enjoy. There's a group of people who jump into Lake Michigan. I live in Chicago every morning. Even when it's freezing, when you're about 6 some other people in a fairly small area, all you need is a handful of folks to find your tribe. In a Magic the Gathering, there's a group want to play chess and you're 2100 yellow. There's a group want to learn how to perfectly brunoise onions peppers like a Michelin-starred chef. There's a group want to play kickball recreationally while drinking beer. There's a group into skateboarding, theater, improv comedy, comic books, cosplay, mixology, burlesque, mixed martial arts, cycling. There's a group of like-minded people that you can engage with. Also, anything past 5 miles is kind of far. If I travel 5 miles from my place, it'll pass dozens of restaurants, grocery stores, clothing shops, bars, parks, event spaces, and all other sorts of places. The furthest I travel on a consistent basis is 13 miles, and I do that via bike or the train. When I visit family in the suburbs, and we have to drive 15 miles to get to a restaurant for dinner, it feels agonizing. Story 38, I've seen rural folks freak out about someone that looks different, lots of tattoos, dyed hair, ethnicity, turban, etc. that we view as part of the city. It's not something they grew up with, so they treat the unfamiliar like a dog growling at them rather than a person who is indifferent to them. They also don't understand the rhythm of a city. We just know where to stand, how to cross a busy street, and how to handle maneuvering in crowds. I kind of understand that because going to Amsterdam, bikes are everywhere and not always on clearly marked bike paths like in the US. It took me a couple days to normalize them as part of the sidewalk traffic and go with that flow. I'm sure the cyclists appreciated me no longer stepping into their path like a typical tourist. Story 39 on positives. How much you can and should walk to things. I walk between 7 to 10 miles a day, just going about my business neutral. You can't hide away in your car or in your house and avoid the world. I'm taking the bus. I'm walking around the city. You see poverty, drug addiction, artwork, other cultures, languages. You very quickly realize how little you know about the world and how insignificant your beliefs and opinions matter. Cons, complete disconnect between where your food, water, services come from. Self-resiliency isn't possible in a dense urban environment. It's by nature only possible to survive in a city through collaboration. You can't avoid your neighbors. Story 40 went rural to city and then back to rural again. And here is what I learned about cities. People aren't looking for communities or new friends in cities. Friendliness is like a traffic jam, and you certainly don't drop by people's houses unannounced. It's about moving forward, not necessarily checking on each other. Great lifestyle for some people, but I personally need unlocked doors. Smoking weed at 2 a.m. with my neighbor half a mile down the road, and chickens waking me up. Story 41, if you missed your turn in the city, or you got in the wrong lane, own your mistake, keep going, and loop back around. If you already up traffic trying to get over, we all wish the worst for you. Story 42, that on average the government, federal, state, and local combined actually spends a lot more money per capita to subsidize their lifestyle choice to live in the middle of nowhere than it does to subsidize those living in urban areas. Story 43, that long list of all the horrors of city life that anti-urban folks frequently cite while complaining about how much better suburban or rural life is virtually identical to the list of benefits of urban life that fans of cities cite when asked why they love living there. Story 44, spending an entire day with headphones on. I use self-checkouts at stores. I work out alone. I finally have a non-customer service job. I'm introverted, and my partner is currently states away. I've gotten through so many podcasts, audiobooks, new release albums. It's the epitome of being alone, but not lonely. Story 45, that some of us want to be around people who aren't like us and are 100 comfortable with that. Interracial couples, lesbian married couples with children, hearing 50 different languages at various restaurants, stores, and city arts events. Women in leadership roles, normalized disability access. Someone trans commuting to work with you on the subway. Your office mates from all over the world. Endless choices for houses of worship, and in a place where it's common not to worship at all without answering to anyone. Living in a rural town where everyone looks like you, has the exact same beliefs and background. That sounds horrible to me. Not comforting. Story 46, grew up rural and live city. I'm a halfling. With a foot in each world, there's so many items to list. Time. In a city, your time is the most valuable resource. There's so much to do, so many people to be around, and so many new changes occurring. It's courteous to be punctual, short, and get to the point. It's the exact opposite for rural people. Time is available, and the most courteous thing you can do is spend more time with someone, arriving early, staying late, making copious amounts of small talk, all shows how much you care about someone to a rural person. Being home. Rural people don't understand that you may not be home in a city. You can't call when you're 15 minutes away from a city person's home and expect them to be there. Fine dining. This seems to be a huge divide. Rural people see Texas Roadhouse as fine dining. It's packed loud, serve big portions of American food. You really feel like you're out socializing because it's huge and there's so many people. Also, the prices are low because the restaurant can cook a steak and potato at scale better than you can at home. City people can't stand the Texas Roadhouse-style restaurant and prefer a place with private and cozy atmosphere. City people pay way more for that cozy, quiet atmosphere, and we expect food that requires so much time to prepare that we would never make it at home. Moving. Rural people live in a house they grew up that their grandparents built. City people move regularly. Everyone rents for a bit. People buy and sell homes based on construction, availability, neighborhood amenities, space need, and real estate value. Privacy. Rural people grow up with privacy. They might be able to see the roof of their neighbor's house. There's this expectation that if you see another person on private property, they are snooping around and up to no good. No good might include just being judgmental. Even if it's simply a person walking their dog down the street. Rural people will be out of their element in facilities with large windows open to the public. They will feel uncomfortable in restaurants with open windows to the sidewalk, houses with windows facing the street, apartment buildings with large windows facing the street, or public parks and terraces that are visible from other locations. City people see the city as its own entity and they want to feel connected to it. City people tend to have windows open facing the world and cherish private facilities with great views. City people only pull the curtains for those intimate moments, but have no problem having a dinner party in front of large windows, facing a sidewalk with people walking around. Infrastructure change. Cities have large departments of people constantly trying to future-proof the infrastructure. There are hundreds of infrastructure projects underway in every major city. Every year, every city is slightly different than it was last year. Rural people might see their small town downtown get a new building get a facelift once every 10 years. It would surely be the talk of the town if a stop sign was added to a street or a turning lane was created. Government. City governments are huge compared to the small town mayor. Rural people don't see the value in paying taxes because their small local government has a much smaller impact on their day-to-day lives versus a city government. For rural people, the state government sets most of the policies that impact them, and for city people, the city government sets most of the policies that impact them. Could write books about the cost of goods and services too, mostly stemming from the socio-economic divide. Story 47, I grew up in blue-collar suburbia. Moved to ghetto, apartments in a dumpy city for 12 years, then moved back to rural blue-collar suburbia, where I currently reside. Anonymity is huge. I love the silence and stars of backwoods suburbia, but the small-town element gets really annoying. I have good relationships with my neighbors, but I don't give a what they're doing or discussing other neighbors' business with them. The town Facebook page is a rancid cesspool, and my suspicions were proven correct. I greatly prefer the live and let be way the city takes. Don't bother me, I won't bother you, and we're good. COVID changed this, but availability of goods after nightfall. There's nothing available out here after 9, but when I lived in the city, I could get any basic store need met at any hour. I lived within walking distance of a 24-hour supermarket and have fond memories of drunken walks at midnight to get snacks. Story 48. Most of us who grew up in massive cities like New York have no problem falling asleep to the sounds of people yelling, traffic, or sirens. The real trouble comes when we try to sleep in complete silence. Story 49. Being able to order takeout at 3 o'clock a.m., never having to drive drunk because of public transportation, being able to go places by yourself as a kid, not having to be driven everywhere. Story 50. The misconception that you can move out of the city and just go visit occasionally when you need a city fix. Cities have a cultural energy that you feel part of when you live there. It gets under your skin. An afternoon visit won't fill that. Story 51. That how you travel and the distance things, aka civilization, are away from you matters differently to city folks than rural folks. The distance things are away from home has a profound psychological effect on many city people. Plenty of us feel like it is an ordeal if necessities are not close by and easily accessible. As a city dweller, the thought that necessities like a grocery store or job or school or doctor hospitalist being so far away is actually anxiety-inducing. It is not a safe, restful, or peaceful feeling. Additionally, city folks have different opinions on what transportation type is best. City folks' opinions are usually different based on their city, but a unifying factor is that the vast majority are comfortable with trading car travel for walking, buses, trains, subways, electric bikes, scooters, skateboards, etc. In fact, most city folk prefer some form of non-car travel and have a variety of opinions on the merits of it. Story 52. That talking to the cashier more than necessary is actually rude, and they will be polite and talk to you, but you are hurting their metrics and could cost them or raise a bonus cause them to get written up. Story 53. The value of diversity. Living in a city, you interact with many people who don't look like you and have widely different backgrounds. Even if your neighborhood isn't very diverse, you'll still run into an assortment of people as you go to various parts of the city over time. Small towns and rural areas tend to be very homogeneous in terms of race, ethnicity, and background. I've recently moved back to a small town to help my aging parents, and I miss the diversity and anonymity of a city. Story 54. The ease of obtaining things. Whether it's food, medicine, or ride, it's all at the touch of a button. I can drive 5 to 10 minutes and have 50 restaurants around me with all different cuisines. I can also pick up drugstore necessities, go to the gym, etc. If I don't feel like driving, I can use apps on my phone to have things delivered or call a car. Things are just easier in the city. I lived part of my life in a town of 10,000 people. You had to drive 45 minutes for decent food and shopping. I hated it. I love living in a big city. Story 55. One thing I haven't seen mentioned, and most people won't even think about, but could be life-changing access to niche expert services for products or medicine. If you or a family member gets diagnosed with an incredibly rare condition that requires advanced tech to stay alive or live independently, take a 20-minute drive downtown to visit one of the top 10 experts in the world. Won't affect 95% of the population, but is that convenient if you run into some deep? Story 56. I went to Panera every day for lunch. The staff got to know me. One day, a lady that works that does not know English came to my table and motioned me to come with her. She takes me to a man that looks European. The man motioned that he needed a bottle opener. I take his drink and twist off the top. He then hands me another one, and I twist off the top. All three of us bow to each other. I wish the nations of the world could do this. No talking, but each helping each other. Story 57. We don't really strike up conversations with strangers, especially on the street. They want money and don't know some of our neighbors' names, even when we live in the same building. Also, you're not going to immediately get mugged when you set foot in the city. Story 58. That there's a reason we generally lean or are hardcore blue and hope for legislature and leadership that prioritizes the well-being of the people within and its society. Easy to ignore homeless populations, public education, and general well-being of the public when you live in a 10K trailer in the sticks a good quarter mile from the nearest other human, and the extent of your community is 42 people in a church or 50-something at Walmart after church. Story 59. Someone in the city wouldn't understand thread mentioned the police reports in the paper and how everyone lives for reading them. Conversely, when I go back to the rural area where I used to live, my old friends can't wrap their heads around me, saying I have more anonymity and privacy in a huge city. They think the tiny town and less people means more separation, but I'd argue everyone knows everyone's business in areas like that, the police reports being just one source of gossip. I live in a dense neighborhood, and the people are nice, but we don't even know each other's names. I know all the dogs, though. Story 60 City allows you to be as social or antisocial as you want. I lived in an apartment for 4 years, and I would not have been able to pick my neighbor, like the person I had a shared wall with, out in a police lineup if required. Story 61 in the neighborhood you are walking through. You are the riffraff, not the dozens of non-white people you walking past that you're terrified of. They live in this neighborhood, and a single-bedroom condo costs 3 times what your house costs. I work in Manhattan and Jersey City. I often take coworkers from rural areas to meetings, and I have to calm them down. They're usually very nervous about walking from meeting to meeting or to a restaurant for a business meal. And when I tell them that we're taking the subway, hoo boy, I have a canned pitch where I tell them, A, they're not going to be murdered, and B, it is by far the fastest way for us to get where we are going. Story 62, a sad thing nowadays is that the most dynamic and interesting people in rural communities have left. The ones that remain behind are often less educated, unemployed, or just plain lazy. I know that sounds terrible, but it's true. Story 63, the joy and ability to get anything you need at a moment's notice. Oh, I forgot an ingredient for dinner tonight. Let me just grab it from the grocery store at the corner. When I worked in a rural area in the mountains, nearest grocery store was at least 20 minutes in the opposite direction from work and home. Story 64, everything you could want or need is within a 30-minute walk. Also, the research you have to do when you look up a service in your area, and there are many options to choose from. Story 65, I've lived in Brooklyn, New York my whole life, and I work in NYC. When I visit other places, I sometimes can't handle how slow everything is. I recently stayed in Philadelphia, not a rural area, and everyone was so slow and making small talk. It felt like that scene at the DMV in Zootopia. This is definitely a me problem, not a them problem at all. Story 66, there are many people who think differently than you do. Approach with an open mind, being able to see things from another's perspective as well as your own. Story 67, packing up a week's worth of laundry and walking to your nearest laundromat 10 blocks down because there aren't laundry units in your apartment, or buying groceries and having to hop on the subway, sitting close to strangers with a week's worth of groceries. NYC.